And so Obama's objective situation is much more like Herbert Hoover's than it is like Roosevelt's.
What do you mean?
In the sense that when Roosevelt came in March of 1933, and there were machine gun nests on the rooftops of Washington for the inaugural parade, everybody knew the banks were closed. Everybody knew that you needed immediate action. Roosevelt's cabinet was sworn in on the first day. He had initiatives ready to go. This was not the situation that faced President Obama by any stretch.
Suppose that your father were around today and '08 had happened, the great collapse. Do you think he might have said, aha, told you so?
He did say, I told you so, in this book, in The Great Crash. He talked about the conditions under which it would recur, and he said, no one can doubt that the American people remain susceptible to the speculative mood, to the conviction that enterprise can be attended by unlimited rewards in which they individually were meant to share. A rising market can still bring the reality of riches. The government preventatives and controls are ready. In the hands of a determined government, their efficacy cannot be doubted. There are, however, 100 reasons why a government will determine not to use them. And that's the point about the crisis, is that it could have been prevented. The people in authority 2, 3, 5 years ago knew how to prevent it. They chose not to act because they were getting a political and an economic benefit out of the speculative explosion that was occurring.
You mean the people who could have prevented the dam from breaking were too busy fishing above it and reaping big rewards to want to fix the crack in it?
Sure. The Federal Reserve in particular knew that the dam was cracking. Alan Greenspan, I think, almost surely knew this, and chose to wait until it had washed away.
Why?
They let all of this run because they were getting a superficially stronger economy out of it. The ownership society, well, that was a scam basically designed to lure people who could never afford these mortgages into accepting them. Yes, I think any rational person, certainly people in the industry, knew that this was not going to last. There was a little industry code I've learned. IBG, YBG meant I'll be gone, you'll be gone.
Okay, really?
Yeah.
The industry being the securities interest?
Well, and the mortgage originators and the bankers generally.
But that's criminal fraud.
Oh, sure. There was a huge amount of it. The Bush administration did not actively investigate the fraud that they knew, that the FBI knew was occurring from 2004 onward. I mean, there will have to be full-scale investigation and cleaning up of the residue of that before you can have I think, a return of confidence in the financial sector. And that's a process which needs to get underway.
The perplexing question to me is whether or not you can reform a system that is so infiltrated by the money from the people who are benefiting from what's going on, who have a vested interest and use their money to promote that vested interest to make sure nothing changes.
I think you can. I think the law is powerful. I think you cannot legalize financial fraud. You cannot fully conceal the tracks of financial fraud. You have to put the resources in to uncover it. You have to prosecute it. You have to give appropriate punishments. But we have a system in this country for doing that. It is a question of a decision to use the judicial resources that we have to clean up the system.
Timothy Geithner wants to provide a super regulator to keep those big 5 firms in line. Will that work?
No, it will not work. The super regulator will not be able to control those institutions and probably will make all of the mistakes that if it's the Federal Reserve, that the Federal Reserve made in the run-up to the last crisis.
Under Greenspan.
Yes, because the priorities of the Fed are always going to be with the larger problem of economic growth, monetary policy. The culture is dominated by its economists. The regulators are down in the hierarchy. So it may have the authority, but as in 1929, it will, in the crunch, choose not to use it. I think what you have to do is to aim to reduce the market power of these enormous, strategically, systemically dangerous institutions. And the way to do that is by reimposing some internal barriers, the Glass-Steagall separation of commercial and investment banking, and by auditing and resolving the institutions that are really close to failure. Those institutions, if they are taken out of the picture, that would permit smaller banks who did not get caught up in this dreadful business to grow into their market roles. And you would have a more competitive and healthier financial system as a result.
But as you speak, Congress is watering down the legislation proposed to regulate the ratings agencies that were such a part of the problem.
Well, the fact that there is lobbying going on from financial institutions that were only yesterday bailed out by the taxpayer is just egregious. It's an outrage. And I know the administration has said this, and I applaud them for having said it. But the political position of the banks, to me, is just totally unacceptable. The public was obliged to rescue them. It is not their role now to be trying to tell Congress what shape and direction of the reform should take. This really should be out of their hands entirely.
So you can understand that anger on the streets outside the American Bankers Association's meeting in Chicago this week.
Of course. It's entirely justified.
Where do you think that anger might go? It could go either direction.
Well, of course. I mean, that's the great danger, is that if there is not a constructive program that people can identify with, there will be a destructive program that they will identify with. And it will come along quite soon. And what form it will take, and it's anybody's guess, but the result will be, very well, could be disastrous.
So we're not out of the woods yet?
No, not by any means. I think we're in an extremely dangerous period in which, as I say, everybody can see that a very small number of people have come out of this. And they cannot see how this is bringing any benefit to their own lives. It's not saving their houses. It's not providing them with jobs.
Is our system so vulnerable that this is going to keep happening? 29, the savings and loan scandals in 89, and now the great collapse of 08.
It's clear that it's vulnerable and that this is a cyclical problem. This is something which comes back after a few decades.
Because we forget?
Because people forget, and because when the system succeeds, then you build up prosperous institutions and they start lobbying. They say everything's fine, things are going well, and they start lobbying for a relaxation of the rules. So it's never going to go away. But you want to have these 20, 30, 40-year periods when you have relatively stable growth and when you're focused and on achieving a certain goal. You can eliminate poverty. You can deal with the environmental questions. You can, in fact, do this if you can sustain a course of policy for, let's say, a 30 or 40-year period. And then you may have strong institutions which can carry you even further. I mean, Social Security, for example, is a nice example. It keeps the elderly population of the country largely out of poverty. If I had one thing I could add to the health care debate, I would lower the age of eligibility of Medicare, say to 55. And the reason for that is that it would help workers who are only hanging on to their jobs because they don't want to lose their medical benefits to move out of the labor force. And there are a fair number of those, and it's a fairly heavy burden on the business sector. So what you want to do, I mean, you want to create jobs, but you've got to recognize we've lost 7 million jobs. Many of those are older workers, and the jobs that you create, you want to give the first crack at those jobs to people who haven't started their careers. You want to get them into the workforce.